Hi, Christine.
Good afternoon, Andy.
Thanks very much for agreeing to this interview. Can we start by my asking you to introduce yourself, please?
So I'm Christine Abraham and I'm Chief Executive of Community Action Suffolk.
Would you like to say something about Community Action Suffolk?
So Community Action Suffolk is an infrastructure organisation supporting the voluntary community and social enterprise sector in Suffolk. We liken ourselves very much to a chamber of commerce for the business sector. We're there to provide the support that the sector needs, help them work together, help them deliver good services for their own beneficiaries, and make sure generally they're running their organisations as well as they can be with the support and resources that they need to do that.
Fantastic. Thank you for that in a nutshell. I've got 4 questions for you, and the first one is this. How have you been looking after yourself during the pandemic, and how have you been supporting your teams through it?
Okay, well, I'll start with the team. So at the start of the pandemic, obviously this was unprecedented times for everybody. We closed both our sites down immediately and supported staff to be able to work from home, which meant quite a change for us. So our IT wasn't fit for purpose for everyone to work from home. We hadn't got a good enough platform to share documents and be able to communicate. So within the first 6 weeks, we upgraded people's IT and installed Microsoft 365, which really helped. I think there's nothing worse trying to do a job if your IT doesn't work. I know everyone gets frustrated when they're trying to do something and it just doesn't happen. So I think getting the basics in place is almost Maslow's hierarchy of needs for the worker, isn't it? Having good IT. We also supported staff to work quite flexibly. Clearly, a lot of our staff are parents and they had to juggle childcare, homeschooling and running the family home. Some of them didn't have a suitable place in their own home to work, so they had to adapt another room, or I've even got one member of staff that moved children into one room so that they could make a temporary office. So we provided what support we could to the team. We've kept in contact by Teams and Zoom, and some of that as we've had a bit of banter on that as well. So one week, for example, I asked them all to come wearing a funny hat, which kept us laughing all the way through the meeting, with one very ginormous Rudolph on somebody's head, which kept bouncing about every time she spoke. But clearly that was for the more formal information sharing purposes as well. I think it's fair to say that some of our staff have really thrived by working at home, and some have really struggled. And it's making sure we look after all of those staff around their individual needs and not think that one size fits all. So that's really about how we've supported our staff to make adaptations during this. For me, personally, I found the initial stages really tough, not being able to see grandchildren, 3 of which live quite close and 3 live in Germany. I also have a mum in a care home, and that was quite hard, having lost my dad 4 years ago, not being able to see mum quite regularly. But the work side of things, I was really busy right from the onset. I think Kaz's role in leading some of the community response, the volunteering and the voluntary sector response was such that we were sort of full on right from day one. I actually think I thrived under pressure. I think it gave me and other members of staff at CAS a feeling of self-worth and really a real purpose for what CAS exists to do. And finally, you'll see that I'm in a nice light office. I was at the start of the pandemic in a very bright pink office, which was my daughter's old bedroom, who's been moved out of the home now for about 10 plus years. And it feels much more like an office now. And I think that has really helped me. Actually, it feels like I'm coming to an office and I'm not coming into my daughter's bedroom. So just getting the environment right has been really important for me. And then all the other things around trying to keep myself well, not worry too much about all the news and media I'm seeing, and trying to keep everything in perspective is how I've looked after myself.
Wow. So yeah, your own personal challenges and the life that surrounds you are probably reflected in a great many other people's And it's great to hear how you've been looking after your team, and both as individuals but also collectively. And great plug for Microsoft as well. Thanks for that.
I'll expect the payment in by check later.
My second question is this: so what's volunteering, and how has it been affected by the pandemic?
So I think there is a general perception out there about what volunteering is, and most people think it will be going to a place once a week and doing an hour's volunteering time. For example, a football coach going to a football club and coaching young people, or going to a luncheon club for old people every Friday lunchtime, helping to cook and serve a meal. But actually, volunteering is much more broad than that. And we tend to refer to it now as people giving their time for the benefit of others. And there's so many ways you can do that that don't require you to go to a physical place, commit time away from the family home, and you can fit that giving of time around your own personal commitments. Something as simple as making a cake for a local sort of fete. Not that we've got very many fetes at the moment, but we have got to sort of look at other ways of raising funds, and you can do things like that from home, as you can sort of take a lead on some social media for a local organisation to keep everyone informed about what that local organisation is doing. So it's far from removed from what the stereotypical volunteering perception is perceived by many people. I think we've got really good levels of people that give their time and volunteer in Suffolk. And generally, I would say the demographics of those that volunteer are generally our older generation. Perhaps those people either sort of nearing retirement, early retirement, or in their more senior years. And I think what has happened is we've seen much more younger people come forward to volunteer. So at the start of the pandemic, we had a couple of online platforms that were really prominent in Suffolk. There was the NHS Good Sam app, and the publicity that reached, claimed that 750,000 people had registered online to volunteer. We also had something called Tribe in Suffolk, because that's what we thought we might need to identify volunteers to be able to support other vulnerable people in their community. And we had almost 2,000 people sign up to Tribe. But I think what we really underestimated was the response that communities were going to come up with themselves. And in fact, they identified thousands and thousands of people to help in these many mutual aid community response groups to do those very low level tasks, like going and getting somebody shopping, making sure they'd got medications from the pharmacies. Simple jobs like taking the dog for a walk because that person was now self-isolating, or just phoning somebody, just checking they're okay, they're up, they've taken their tablets, and doing some quite helpful tasks like that. Very much like our good neighbour schemes that we've got a fantastic network of in Suffolk. So really how people have volunteered during the pandemic is really probably quite different from how people were volunteering before, which was in sort of more formal, regular routes and in organisations, to being far more sporadic and as and when required and ad hoc type volunteering. And it's been absolutely brilliant to see that in all of our communities, pretty much across all of Suffolk.
Thank you. Yeah, I, from my own experience, I also know that volunteering spans a very broad range of skill sets and expertise and knowledge and training that's required as well. And I assume that in response to the pandemic, we weren't necessarily after that high end. We were after people being able to do what you've just described and helping people get their medication, their food, and so on.
I think primarily during the emergency stage of the pandemic, that was absolutely what we needed. But I don't think we should forget that we've got volunteers, not just in the voluntary sector, but also in public sector, with special police officers, volunteers in hospitals that will help on wards, or perhaps help in A&E by serving tea and refreshments to relatives that are anxiously waiting for news. So we shouldn't forget that volunteering is across the voluntary sector, the public sector, and in society generally. And we obviously need to continue all of those levels of volunteering as well, because we're going to need people to be really good citizens and offer to help out more and more as we go into the next stages of this of recovery and of the pandemic.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. School governors, charity trustees, and so on. Third question is this. So what did the voluntary community and social enterprise sector bring to the COVID response? And what do you think they'll continue to do in the recovery phase?
So I think we need to be clear what we mean when we talk about the voluntary sector or the VCSE sector, as you've just spelt it out in full, the voluntary community and social enterprise sector. We're not talking about one homogenous organisation here. We're talking about the makeup of around in Suffolk, around 18,000 different organisations and groups. We know we've got 3,000 registered charities, and we know we've got just over 3,000 other registered organisations that are social enterprises and not-for-profit companies that perhaps trade and generate an income from their trading, but are very much not-for-profit and for charitable benefits. Alongside that 6,000, we have a plethora, blimey, how have we needed those, of small community groups that include sort of groups like parent and toddler groups, all the social connection type groups that we have, from youth clubs to older people's clubs, sports activities, faith groups, uniformed groups, the list goes on and on. Hence, it is a finger in the air about that other 12,000 that we guesstimate to be in Suffolk. But we think that's probably an underestimate rather than an overestimate. So when we talk about the voluntary sector and how it's responded, clearly some of those community groups I've just described in some of that volunteering answer about how some of those community groups have stepped up. But some of our larger charities have also sort of really responded in ways because of the increased demand that they've seen, whether they were mental health charities or family support charities, people supporting the homeless, people supporting people with drug and alcohol addiction, people supporting those that living with a disability. So they have all been impacted by the crisis that COVID has caused, and they have all had to step up. Clearly, some of our organisations stopped operating overnight. Going back to those small community groups, our over 60s clubs and our youth clubs, most of those will have stopped because that's what national lockdown told us we had to do. We had to adhere to social distancing, and we couldn't meet other people in our community. But some of those groups have really also sort of changed the way that they meet people. So instead of meeting people at the village hall on a Friday night, they've actually connected with people via technology, via the internet, or by phone. You know, the phones still work. It's not all about Zoom and Teams anymore. And it's been really, really wonderful to see some of the innovative ways that charities and community groups have continued to make sure they're connected with all the people that they were there supporting before the pandemic. But I think we are seeing, unfortunately, we are seeing increasing demand, particularly for some of our more vulnerable people, whether it's a decline in mental health, an increase in people facing financial hardship, an increase in the number of people that are having to use our food banks. And I think that's, unfortunately, despite the Chancellor's announcement yesterday to continue to support people in employment, I think we are going to see for a little while charities having to deal with increased numbers of people in the community to support.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, no, I can't add to that. It's a huge challenge, but when you describe 18,000 groups out there, the statutory sector is really, really lucky to have us all. So looking to the future then, and considering what learning and challenges we've been able to draw on, what do you think will come from this outbreak in terms of what we've learned?
Well, there's things that I'd really like to see come from it. Certainly one is just people being really good neighbours and being really neighbourly to people in their street, in their neighbourhood. just making themselves known and getting to know who their other neighbours are, and seeing what help and support they can do. Even sort of neighbours helping other neighbours that aren't particularly vulnerable, or just connecting with them more. I'm going to the shop, save two of us going to the shop. Can I pick you something up on the way as well? So I think there's a lot we can do to nurture the neighbourliness that this pandemic has created in that way. I think it's really brought together communities, particularly some of those community groups and volunteers, together with the local church, the local parish council or town council, the organisations, the sports clubs. I can't remember which community it was, but there was a football club somewhere where the football players, because they couldn't go out and train, actually all volunteered to go out and deliver food and medication. And that would never happened without COVID, would it? That a bunch of sort of 6 foot football players would go out and help the less able in their community. So it's that type of behaviour that I think we really need to continue to nurture and to grow, and so that becomes the norm and not the exception. I think other things that we would like to learn from this is, I think we have all have experienced a fantastic digital transformation and got up to speed with how we connect with people in a virtual way. And that has really enabled us to maintain some of those relationships that might have been lost, and people might not have had the support they needed without that quick digital transformation that we saw. I think the challenge that comes from that, though, is probably the report that I saw not long back, which says that 10% of our people across the country still do not have any means of connecting via the internet or by phone. So we just need to bear that in mind. I think because we've all had a shared vision, which was how do we support people who are vulnerable in our communities and make sure that their basic needs are met, that has really enabled us to work together as a partnership, both within the voluntary sector, but also across other parts, other sectors. So working with our local government at Suffolk County Council and at the district and borough councils, working with colleagues in the health sector. Some of those barriers to us working together in a collaborative way have been reduced, and we've been able to find ways that we can share information about Mrs. Miggins who needs her prescription collecting. And actually, it's not that difficult to share information about where Mrs. Miggins lives, because if Mrs. Miggins doesn't get her prescription, then Mrs. Miggins might get very ill. So I really want to, I really want to see some of those other red tape and bureaucracies that stopped us working together in partnership, some of that continuing in the future. I think some of the challenges that we've got coming up, we have unfortunately seen the widening inequalities in our communities. There's been quite a lot of publicity and media around the inequalities with our Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. But I think there are other inequalities, particularly in our rural communities, and in Suffolk we are very rural, particularly in our coastal towns as well. We've got inequalities and other minority groups like people living with disabilities or poor mental health. And I think we need to learn from how we have supported some of those inequalities during the pandemic, where the gaps have been, where we haven't done that very well. And we need to come up with a shared plan and again, have that shared vision to make sure that no one else slips through the net, and that everybody has the same chances as everyone else to level up those inequalities. So I think that's my thoughts on sort of some of the learning and some of the challenges that we've had. I'm not really a person that really spends a lot of time thinking about the negatives, although you do need to know what has not worked well to be able to put it right. But I'd rather look at what has gone well, what have we learned from what's gone well, and how can we build on that and make that even better? And then I think that will start to address some of those other things that we know we need to improve upon. So it's very much a positive, glass half full attitude rather than a glass half empty. I think Nick Hume, the chief exec of Ipswich and Colchester Hospital, at the start of this pandemic said, out of every crisis comes an opportunity, and that has stuck with me right through this pandemic. Those words that Nick said that morning, I think you were in that meeting, Andy. Those words have really stuck with me about we mustn't get too bogged down with all the travesty that's happening. Let's find what the opportunities are to change the things that haven't worked well and to strengthen the things that have gone well and build on them to make society better.
Right. That's a good note to end on, and let's do it together, yeah?
Yes, absolutely. We're all in it together.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.